The screen of my phone illuminated the dark walls of my dorm room. Checking my banking app was usually a muscle memory reflex, a quick glance to confirm my tuition funds were still secure. Tonight, the numbers did not make sense. The app refreshed. The screen glowed bright white in the dark room. Available balance $412. That was my entire net worth. At exactly 9:14 on a Thursday night, my college fund vanished. The money my grandparents left in a designated trust for my education was gone. A single digital transfer wiped out $40,000 in one keystroke. My name is Orabel, and I was 20 years old. The phone rang 3 minutes later. It was my father, Richard. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my midterm exams were going. His voice was flat, carrying the exact tone of a corporate manager announcing a department layoff. "We are reallocating the resources, Kaya," he said. Khloe got accepted into an elite private university. She is representing the family academic future now. One scholar is enough. Khloe is my younger sister. She spent her high school years attending luxury rush week parties and skipping classes, while I worked in the campus library to pay for my textbooks. Now Richard decided she was the priority investment. My tuition was due in exactly 48 hours. If I did not pay, I would be dropped from my courses and evicted from campus housing. I asked him how I was supposed to cover the semester. He sighed through the receiver as if I was being an inconvenience. "You will figure it out," he said. "You are the strong one." Then he hung up. The call lasted exactly 40 seconds. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you a favor. If you have ever been the dependable daughter who was expected to sacrifice everything for the golden child, welcome to Sophia Told Stories. Please take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if my story speaks to your reality. Drop your age, your location, and your local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that quiet dorm room and the night my family decided I was collateral damage. I sat on the edge of my twin bed staring at the blank wall. I did not cry. Crying requires a belief that someone will care enough to comfort you. I just felt a cold tightening in my chest. For 19 years, I played the role of the invisible workhorse. I earned the grades. I stayed out of trouble. I asked for nothing. Khloe asked for everything and received it with a bow on top. That night I realized the rules of their game. Merit did not matter. Only favoritism mattered. I opened my laptop to check if I could apply for an emergency extension from the university bursar office. My hands were still shaking as I typed my student ID number. Then my phone buzzed again. A text message lit up the screen. It was from my mother, Susan. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask how I was handling the news about the stolen college fund. Her message contained exactly 2 sentences. "We are taking Khloe out to a nice steakhouse to celebrate her acceptance. Can you chip in $50 for the champagne?" I looked at the text. I looked at my $412 bank balance. The audacity was so sharp, it felt clinical. They did not just want to drain my future to fund her lifestyle. They wanted me to smile and pay for the toast. I put the phone face down on the desk. That was the moment the loyal daughter died. In her place, someone entirely new woke up. The university bursar office opened at 8 in the morning. I was the first student standing outside the frosted glass doors on Friday. I did not carry a parent. I did not carry a checkbook. I carried a printed summary of my financial profile and a hardened jaw. The clerk behind the counter processed an emergency deferred payment arrangement. It required a non-refundable fee and steep monthly installments I currently had no way to cover. I signed the contract on the dotted line. By noon, I was sitting in the back office of a downtown business hotel, interviewing for the only position that accommodated 18 upper-level credit hours. The title was Night Auditor. The shift ran from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 5 days a week. The manager looked at my class schedule and warned me I would burn out within a month. I looked him in the eye and told him I did not have the luxury of burning out. I started that same evening. The reality of the night shift strips away your humanity layer by layer. I lived on a rotating cycle of caffeine and fluorescent lighting. I would finish my shift at 7 in the morning, take the city bus directly to campus, and sit through macroeconomics at 8. My uniform was a cheap polyester blazer provided by the hotel management. Within 2 weeks, a permanent odor of stale dark roast coffee and industrial lobby bleach soaked into the fabric. I could not wash it out. I wore that smell into my lecture halls like a physical weight. My physical exhaustion became a secondary heartbeat. While I was reconciling hotel guest ledgers in the dead of night, Khloe was experiencing the curated freshman fall my grandparents had intended for me. Our family dynamic was always a carefully constructed stage play. Khloe was the designated star. She was fluent in the currency of manipulation. If she missed a curfew, she knew exactly how to tilt her head and let her voice waver until Richard stepped in to comfort her instead of issuing a consequence. If she failed a high school chemistry exam, Susan blamed the teacher for lacking empathy. I was the invisible infrastructure that kept the house running. I cooked the dinners on weeknights. I organized the family calendar. I was the steady, dependable baseline they ignored until they needed something fixed. My grades were an expectation. Her mere participation was celebrated as an achievement. As October arrived, the physical toll of working 40 hours a week and carrying a full academic load began to break me down. My skin turned a pale, translucent shade. My hands shook when I poured my 4th cup of coffee behind the hotel reception desk. But the true turning point did not come from the fatigue. It came from a screen. It was 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. The lobby was entirely empty. I logged into my social media account on my phone to check a study group page. My timeline refreshed. A post from Richard appeared at the top of my feed. It was a photograph of Khloe standing in front of her new private university wearing a designer sweatshirt. The caption read, "Sending our genius off to change the world." Sometimes you just know which child is destined for greatness. The family academic legacy begins now. I stared at the screen. The family academic legacy. He used the exact funds left for my education to pay for her tuition, and then framed it as a triumph of her intellect. He erased my 3 years of Dean List honors in a single sentence. I scrolled further down his profile. A week prior, he posted a lengthy status updating the extended relatives. The text hit my chest like a physical strike. "It is always hard when our kids struggle with their paths," Richard wrote. "Kaya has decided the rigorous university track is not for her right now. She is taking a step back to find herself and figure out her priorities. We support her journey, even if it means stepping away from her degree." I set the phone on the marble counter. My breathing stopped. He did not just steal my trust fund. He engineered a preemptive social rewrite. He knew family members would eventually ask why my tuition money went to Khloe. To cover his tracks, he buried my reputation. He painted me as a lost, wandering college dropout who lacked the discipline to finish school. He made himself look like the patient, supportive patriarch dealing with a flaky daughter, while elevating Khloe to the status of a prodigy. The fallout from his post materialized the very next night. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket while I was restocking the lobby coffee station. It was Aunt Barbara, Richard's older sister. She lived in Ohio and rarely called outside of the holidays. I answered the call standing next to a stack of styrofoam cups. "Kaya, sweetheart," her voice poured through the speaker, dripping with unearned pity. "Your father told us the news. I am so sorry you felt overwhelmed by your classes. There is no shame in taking a break. Not everyone is cut out for the pressure of academia. Maybe you can find a nice retail management training program while you figure things out." I stood frozen, holding a handful of sugar packets. The urge to scream the truth clawed at my throat. I wanted to tell her about this stolen $40,000. I wanted to tell her about the emergency deferred payment plan. I wanted to tell her I was currently standing in a hotel lobby at 3 in the morning, paying for my own textbooks while carrying 18 credits of advanced finance. But a sudden clinical clarity washed over me. Arguing with Aunt Barbara would achieve nothing. She would call Richard. Richard would spin another lie, calling me hysterical or jealous. He held the narrative high ground. He controlled the family communication channels. Waiting him on his turf with emotion would only confirm his story. I did not need to correct Aunt Barbara. I needed to let them believe I was defeated. "Thank you, Aunt Barbara," I said into the phone. My voice was steady and hollow. "I am just focusing on my work right now." I hung up the phone. A cold, calculating rage settled deep inside my ribs. It was a clean, precise emotion. I realized surviving the tuition deadline was no longer the goal. Survival was insufficient. I was going to obliterate their entire narrative. I was going to build a reality so undeniable it would crush their fiction under its own weight. I walked back behind the reception desk. The digital clock on the computer monitor read 3:15 in the morning. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a thick, heavy textbook I had purchased from a senior student earlier that day. It was a comprehensive prep manual for the Graduate Management Admission Test, the GMAT. I opened the book to the first chapter. The lobby was dead silent. The hotel security cameras recorded me sitting under the dim glow of the desk lamp. I began solving complex data sufficiency problems while the rest of my family slept comfortably in the beds I used to help make. The secret grind officially commenced. I planned to apply to the most ruthless elite Master of Business Administration programs in the country. I would do it entirely in the shadows. To start this process, I needed to consolidate my meager finances to afford the $250 standardized testing fee. The next evening, before my shift, I began gathering my old financial documents to search for any overlooked assets. I remembered a joint savings account Richard and I opened when I was 16. I earned the money working as a lifeguard. I logged into the banking portal to check if there was enough interest accrued to cover the test fee. The account no longer existed. A digitized notice indicated it had been closed 3 weeks prior. I clicked the prompt to request the official closure document. The document arrived in my inbox during my lunch break. I opened the PDF file expecting a standard administrative notice. Instead, my eyes locked onto the bottom of the page and my blood ran cold. The PDF file loaded slowly on the outdated hotel lobby computer. I zoomed in on the scanned closure form for the joint savings account. The header displayed the familiar bank logo. Below that, the final transaction details were printed in crisp black digital ink. A withdrawal of $2,140.50. That was the exact sum I earned working back-to-back summer shifts at the municipal pool when I was 16. I saved every dollar of that money to buy a reliable used car. Richard never let me purchase the vehicle, claiming I was not responsible enough for the insurance premiums. So the funds sat dormant, gaining a few pennies of interest a year. Until 3 weeks ago. The destination routing number matched an account I recognized instantly. It was the joint checking account Richard opened for Khloe right before she left for orientation. He called it her dorm decoration and networking fund. My eyes scrolled down to the authorization section. A joint account requires both account holders to sign the final closure mandate. Richard signed his name on the top line, his familiar, jagged cursive pressing hard into the paper. On the line below his, my name was written, Kaya Orabel. I leaned closer to the monitor. The fluorescent overhead lights cast a harsh glare against the screen. I studied the ink strokes of my own forged name. Whoever signed it tried to mimic the slant of my handwriting, but they made a critical structural error. When I write my first name, the letter K has a sharp, straight upward strike. It is a rigid, fast motion. The K on this banking form looped lazily at the top. The letter A tilted at an awkward, forced angle. It was Richard. He forged my signature to drain a teenage lifeguard salary and funnel it directly into his youngest daughter's luxury shopping budget. This was no longer a story about an unfair parent playing favorites. This was a story about a man committing felony financial fraud against his own child. A normal daughter might have picked up the phone, dialed the police, or screamed at her father, demanding answers. I did none of those things. Confronting Richard in the heat of the moment would give him the advantage. He would pivot instantly. He would claim he had parental rights to the money. He would tell the bank it was a simple misunderstanding. He would cry to the extended family that I was trying to send him to prison over a technicality. The truth is fragile when you are fighting someone who owns the entire narrative. I needed something stronger than a phone call. I needed an undeniable, bulletproof portfolio. I printed 3 copies of the forged document using the laser printer hidden in the hotel back office. I took my cell phone and captured high-resolution photographs of the signature line from multiple angles. I ran the physical printout through the commercial scanner and emailed the encrypted file to myself. I organized the evidence the way a prosecutor builds a case. I saved the digital files to a primary cloud drive, uploaded backups to a secondary hidden server, and transferred a final copy to a physical flash drive I kept buried at the bottom of my work locker. I was archiving their betrayals. Every stolen dollar, every forged loop of ink, every lie told to Aunt Barbara went into the ledger. September bled into October. The reality of working graveyard shifts while studying high-level finance began to strip away my physical health. My weight dropped. Dark hollows carved themselves under my eyes. I survived on stale lobby bagels and a sheer, unyielding refusal to fail. During my breaks, usually around 4 in the morning, I studied for the graduate management admission test. To stay awake, I sometimes allowed myself to look at Khloe's social media feeds. The contrast between our lives was jarring, but it acted as a highly effective stimulant. Her freshman fall semester was a masterclass in curated excess. While I was scrubbing coffee stains out of a polyester blazer, Khloe was posting daily videos of her outfits. Her timeline was a parade of unboxing videos. Designer Rush Week dresses, expensive cosmetics, handbags that cost more than my monthly rent. She posted a photo carousel from a chartered party bus heading to a fraternity formal event in a neighboring state. In every photo, she held a different expensive cocktail, surrounded by girls wearing matching custom sorority jackets. This disparity was not new. It was a core feature of our upbringing. Susan used to justify the spending gap when we were teenagers. She would smooth Khloe's hair and say, "Khloe is our social butterfly. She needs a wardrobe that reflects her networking potential. You are practical, Kaya. You do not need all the frills to be happy." They trained me to accept nothing so they could give her everything. But viewing her digital footprint now, knowing that the designer dresses and the chartered buses were funded by my stolen trust fund and my forged lifeguard savings, did not make me sad. It made me dangerous. Every time Khloe posted a new luxury purchase, I completed another timed practice exam. Her vanity was literally fueling my escape velocity. I memorized complex data sufficiency formulas while she memorized sorority chants. By mid-October, the midterm examination season arrived. The air turned cold and the tension in my chest tightened. My plan was functioning silently. No one in the family checked on me. They assumed I was working some menial retail job, drowning in the consequences of my alleged decision to drop out. I preferred the silence. Then, on a Tuesday evening, just as I was lacing up my shoes for my night shift, my phone vibrated on the cheap laminate dresser. The screen illuminated the dark room. It was a text message from Susan. It had been weeks since the $50 champagne demand. I opened the message. There were no pleasantries. There was no inquiry about my well-being. It read exactly like a work order. Khloe is having a hard time adjusting to the academic rigor. Her professors are being unreasonable with their grading rubrics. She needs you to look over her midterms and help her rewrite her essays. Hop on a video call with her tonight. I stared at the glowing text. The sheer, breathtaking nerve of the demand settled over me. They drained my entire financial future. They committed a felony to steal my teenage savings. They stranded me on a graveyard shift to pay for my own survival. And now, because their chosen scholar was failing to perform, they expected me to provide free academic labor to save her. They wanted the invisible workhorse to carry the golden child across the finish line. I did not reply to Susan immediately. I let her text sit on the glowing screen of my phone while I tied my heavy work shoes for the night shift. The temptation to ignore the message was strong. Cutting contact would have been the easiest path. But working in forensic risk analysis teaches you that information is the most valuable currency in any conflict. If Susan was reaching out to me, the invisible daughter she had discarded weeks prior, the situation was already dire. She was bypassing Richard to quietly patch a leak in their pristine narrative. I texted back a single word of agreement. I arranged a video conference for my lunch break the following day. I wanted a front row seat to witness the return on their investment. The next afternoon, I sat in the cramped employee break room of the hotel. The digital clock on the microwave read 1 in the afternoon. The room smelled of ozone, old pennies, and burnt popcorn. I opened my laptop, connected to the sluggish employee internet network, and initiated the call. Khloe answered after 4 rings. The contrast between our environments was stark. Behind my shoulders sat gray cinder block walls and a humming vending machine. Behind her head sat a plush velvet headboard, ambient string lights, and a window overlooking a manicured campus quadrangle. Her physical appearance, however, betrayed the pristine background. She wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors. Her blonde hair was tangled in a messy knot. She cradled a large plastic cup of iced coffee, wincing noticeably when the ice rattled against the sides. She was nursing a severe hangover on a Wednesday afternoon. She did not say thank you for making the time. She did not ask about my hotel job. She immediately launched into a monologue about the targeted injustices of higher education. The professors did not understand her creative learning process. The teaching assistants graded with unfair biases. The reading assignments were unrealistic for a student with a busy networking schedule. I let her complain. I played the role of the sympathetic listener, nodding at the appropriate intervals. I asked her to share her screen so we could review the prompt for her upcoming sociology midterm. I needed to see the raw data. She clicked the share icon. Her student portal expanded across my monitor. She navigated toward the assignment Dropbox, scrolling past the grading rubrics and lecture notes. But my eyes darted away from the main text and locked onto the right side of the dashboard. A small, bright red, circular icon hovered next to her seminar module. It was the digital attendance tracker. The number 14 sat inside the red circle. 14 unexcused absences. I did the math in my head. In a standard introductory seminar that met twice a week, 14 absences equated to vanishing for nearly 2 entire months of instruction. She had effectively stopped attending class right after the syllabus week. I kept my voice neutral. I asked her to click on the course syllabus to check the late penalty policy for her current essay. Her cursor moved across the screen, inadvertently opening her gradebook tab in the process. 3 major analytical papers were listed. Next to each title sat a 0. The status column displayed one word in bold red lettering: missing. "You have not submitted the core coursework for this module," I stated. My tone lacked any judgment. It was a simple forensic observation of the facts presented on the screen. Khloe waved her hand dismissively, nearly knocking over her iced coffee. "The instructor is rigid," she slurred slightly, pulling her sunglasses down to rub her temples. "I talked to Richard about it yesterday on the phone. He's going to call the dean of students tomorrow morning. He said they will smooth it over. We pay enough tuition here, they cannot just fail me over a few missed deadlines and some attendance technicalities." I watched her through the webcam. She truly believed this fiction. She believed the rules of a prestigious academic institution functioned exactly like the rules of our childhood dining room, where Richard could simply rewrite reality to shield her from any tangible consequences. She thought a phone call from a suburban father could erase months of truancy. I realized in that moment she was not merely struggling with the transition to college-level academics. She was actively detonating the trust fund they stole from me. She was burning the family academic legacy to the ground, one fraternity mixer and missed deadline at a time. The $40,000 Richard extracted from my future was evaporating into hangovers and zeros. I did not lecture her. I did not warn her that university deans do not care about angry phone calls from entitled parents. Giving her a reality check would only give her a chance to course correct. I offered a few generic formatting tips for her blank document, wished her luck on the midterm, and terminated the connection. The screen went dark. The hum of the vending machine filled the break room again. I now held the secret of her impending academic ruin. It dovetailed perfectly with the secret of my impending success. I logged out of the video software and opened a new browser tab. I navigated directly to the official Graduate Management Admission Test portal. I selected a testing date in early December. The screen prompted me for the $250 registration fee. I had spent the last 3 weeks eating nothing but 90-cent packets of ramen noodles in this exact break room to save this specific amount. The lack of protein gave me constant, dull headaches. The salt made my joints ache. But staring at the payment gateway, I felt nothing but a clean, cold surge of adrenaline. I reached into my wallet, pulled out my debit card, and typed the numbers into the empty fields. The transaction processed. A digital receipt appeared on the screen, followed by a testing confirmation number. I was officially registered. My escape route was locked in, paid for by my own endurance. I printed the confirmation page, folded it into neat squares, and tucked it into my blazer pocket. As I closed the laptop to return to the front desk, my cell phone vibrated on the table. A new text message illuminated the lock screen. The sender was Richard. He rarely texted me unless it involved a logistical demand. I swiped the notification to read the full message. Since you are working full-time now and taking a break from your studies, we are restructuring the household expenses. We are taking you off the auto insurance policy effective at midnight tonight. You need to secure your own coverage. I stared at the words. The financial cuts were continuing, precise, and deliberate. Taking me off the insurance saved him perhaps $80 a month. It was a marginal sum for a man who just funded a luxury off-campus apartment. But coupled with Khloe's failing grades and her exorbitant lifestyle, the timing was highly revealing. He was scraping the bottom of the barrel. The stolen college fund was bleeding out faster than he anticipated, and he was liquidating my basic safety nets to cover the shortfall. If I wanted to drive my car to my night shifts, I now had to absorb another unexpected monthly bill on a budget that was already stretched to the breaking point. The financial strangulation was tightening, pushing me closer to the edge. And as the harsh winter months approached, this lack of coverage would trigger a health crisis that would force me to choose between physical survival and the future I was secretly building in the dark. November swept through the city with a brittle, punishing cold. The temperature drop exposed the fragile reality of my daily routine. Working graveyard shifts at the hotel and attending rigorous daytime lectures required a physical endurance I could no longer sustain. The human body is not designed to function indefinitely on 3 hours of interrupted daylight sleep. The physical attrition finally breached my immune system during the 3rd week of the month. It started as a subtle ache in my chest and rapidly evolved into a severe respiratory infection. During my night audits, the coughing fits became so intense I had to crouch behind the marble reception counter to catch my breath. The polyester hotel blazer trapped the fever sweats against my skin, leaving me shivering whenever the lobby doors opened to admit the freezing autumn wind. I tried to suppress the illness, using cheap, over-the-counter remedies purchased from convenience stores. Those brightly colored syrups provided zero relief. By Wednesday, my breathing carried a distinct wet rattle. I could not afford to miss a single shift. Calling out sick meant losing wages I desperately needed for graduate school application fees, which hovered around $250 per institution. I planned to apply to 3 top-tier programs. My budget was calculated down to the final cent. I forced myself to visit the university's student health clinic between my morning classes. The consultation was covered by my tuition fees. The attending physician listened to my lungs using a cold stethoscope, frowned, and diagnosed an acute lower respiratory tract infection. He warned me that ignoring the symptoms could lead to pneumonia. He printed a prescription for a high-dose course of antibiotics and a specialized inhaler, instructing me to fill them immediately. I walked 2 blocks to the local pharmacy. The store smelled of artificial lavender and sterile alcohol. I waited in line under the humming fluorescent lights, shifting my weight from one exhausted leg to the other. When I reached the counter, I handed the pharmacist my paper prescription and the plastic family health coverage card I had carried in my wallet since high school. The pharmacist scanned the barcode on the back of the card. He typed a few keystrokes into his terminal. He paused, squinted at the monitor, and typed another sequence. "I am sorry," he said, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of a retail medical worker. "The system indicates this policy is inactive for your specific profile. The primary account holder terminated your dependent status on the 1st of the month." I stood motionless. The ambient noise of the store seemed to fade into a dull hum. The primary account holder was Richard. My mind executed a rapid forensic calculation. Richard's previous text message regarding the termination of my auto coverage was a deliberate smokescreen. He did not just remove my car from the family ledger, he enacted a total systemic purge. Family health plans charge monthly premiums based on the number of enrolled dependents. By quietly dropping my medical coverage, he saved himself perhaps $200 a month. He traded my access to basic health care to free up liquid cash. I knew exactly where that diverted cash was flowing. Khloe's private university sorority had recently issued their winter semester dues. Richard stranded me without a safety net during flu season to subsidize his youngest daughter's Greek life networking events. The pharmacist cleared his throat, holding the white paper bag containing my medication. "The out-of-pocket cost for the generic antibiotic and the inhaler is $180, he stated. "Do you still want to fill the order?" I stared at the white paper bag. $180 represented nearly an entire application fee for an Ivy League business program. It represented hours of standing behind a hotel desk serving demanding guests. I pulled out my cell phone and opened my banking application. My available balance sat at $270. If I purchased the medicine, my account would drain down to double digits. I would lose the capital required to submit my graduate applications on time. If I declined the medicine, the infection would spread to my lungs, forcing a hospitalization that would bankrupt me entirely and destroy my academic standing. It was a flawless trap. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my debit card, and slid it across the glass counter. I chose to breathe. I watched the digital terminal process the transaction. Approved. The screen flashed the confirmation. My net worth plummeted to $90. I took the paper bag, walked out into the freezing street, and swallowed the first massive antibiotic pill dry. This transaction solidified a profound emotional detachment inside me. The last remaining frayed threads connecting me to the concept of family snapped. They literally did not care if I was physically well. They viewed my survival as an unnecessary line item on a budget sheet. I felt no sorrow, only a pristine, icy resolve. To bridge the financial deficit caused by the medical ambush, I required immediate supplemental income. The hotel food and beverage director was chronically understaffed for the weekend holiday banquets. I volunteered for double shifts. On Saturdays, I worked the front desk from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, slept for 3 hours in my dorm room, and returned to the hotel at noon to serve catered dinners until midnight. I carried heavy silver trays of roasted chicken and steamed vegetables, while my chest burned from the lingering infection. The scent of chafing dish fuel and melted butter coated my hair. My feet blistered inside my cheap black uniform shoes. Every agonizing step across that ballroom carpet was a deposit into my application fund. During one of those brutal 14-hour banquet shifts, I took a mandated 10-minute break in the employee locker room. I sat on a plastic bench, rubbing my swollen ankles, and opened social media to check a message from a classmate. The algorithm thrust a new video onto my screen. It was a social media post from Khloe. She had checked into a luxury ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. The video showcased pristine white mountain peaks glaring under a bright blue sky. Khloe twirled in front of the camera wearing a pristine designer snowsuit and oversized reflective goggles. She held a steaming mug of gourmet hot chocolate topped with toasted marshmallows. The caption read, "Winter retreat with the sisters, escaping the academic stress." I watched the footage loop 3 times in the dim light of the locker room. The sorority winter retreat, the lift tickets, the designer thermal wear, the slopeside accommodations. All of it was financed by the scholarship fund Richard stole from my future, supplemented by the medical premiums he recovered by terminating my health coverage. She was drinking hot chocolate in Aspen, while I was coughing up phlegm in a concrete basement to pay for my own antibiotics. The inequity was so vast, it felt cinematic. But the contrast served a vital purpose. It killed any lingering hesitation. It sharpened my focus into a lethal instrument. December arrived with gray skies and sleet. The deadline for the graduate management admission test loomed. The antibiotics had cleared the worst of the fluid from my lungs, though a dry, hacking cough persisted. On the morning of the exam, I wore 3 layers of clothing to suppress my intermittent fever chills. The testing center was a sterile fortress located in an unassuming suburban office park. The protocol was ruthless. I locked my coat, my phone, and my wallet inside a metal cubby. A proctor scanned the biometric veins in my palm to verify my identity. I was escorted into a silent, carpeted room filled with divided computer terminals. I sat down at the designated workstation. I placed my authorized foam earplugs into my ears, drowning out the ambient hum of the ventilation system. For the next 3 hours and 30 minutes, I engaged in a grueling psychological marathon. The quantitative reasoning sections required flawless mental arithmetic. The verbal sections demanded rapid, surgical reading comprehension. I fought through the lingering brain fog caused by my illness, relying on the hundreds of hours I spent studying at the hotel reception desk in the dead of night. Every correct answer was a brick in the wall separating me from the Orabel household. Spite is a highly effective cognitive enhancer. When the final screen prompted me to accept my unofficial score, my finger hovered over the mouse. I clicked confirm. The numbers generated on the monitor. I committed them to memory, stood up, and walked out of the testing room. I retrieved my belongings from the metal locker. My hands felt light. The physical weight of the preparation was over. The execution phase was beginning. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the testing center and stepped out into the freezing December afternoon. The sleet stung my cheeks, but the cold air felt incredibly clean in my lungs. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket to check the time. The screen illuminated instantly in my palm. An incoming call was vibrating against my numb fingers. The caller identification displayed Richard's name. He had not spoken to me since the brief text message canceling my insurance weeks ago. He did not know I had just completed a high-level graduate entrance exam. He did not know I had survived a severe infection without his coverage. I stared at the flashing screen, calculating the variables. He was calling because the fiction he built was requiring maintenance. I pressed the green icon and lifted the speaker to my ear. I did not say a word. "Kaya," Richard said. His tone lacked any parental warmth. He sounded stressed, speaking in the rapid, clipped cadence of a man attempting to manage a crisis he could not control. "I need a small favor from you." I stood on the sleet-covered sidewalk outside the testing facility while the winter wind whipped against my coat. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the man who had systematically dismantled my financial security ask me for a favor. Richard did not sound like a father speaking to his daughter. He sounded like a desperate loan officer trying to close a high-risk portfolio. He bypassed any personal greetings and immediately launched into a rehearsed pitch. Khloe is dealing with an unacceptable living situation, he explained, his voice tight and hurried. The undergraduate residence halls are a chaotic environment. Her roommates are disruptive, and the constant noise is interfering with her rigorous study schedule. She needs a quiet sanctuary to focus on her academics. We found a beautiful 2-bedroom unit at the Vanguard. It is an off-campus luxury building with private study lounges. He paused, waiting for me to offer my standard compliant agreement. I remained silent, watching the passing traffic kick up gray slush onto the curb. The leasing office requires a guarantor, Richard continued, his tone shifting into a forced, artificial casualness. They need someone with a pristine credit history to co-sign the agreement. My capital is currently tied up in a few complex liquidity transitions, so my debt-to-income ratio is looking a little skewed on paper. You have 0 debt and a flawless credit score. I need you to put your name on the lease. It is just a formality. I will cover the monthly rent payments. I processed the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of his request. He wanted me to legally tether myself to a luxury apartment lease for the sister who was currently spending my stolen tuition money. But beyond the audacity, my forensic mindset immediately dissected the structure of his lie. Universities mandate that first-year students reside in campus housing for the entire academic cycle. The institution does not permit freshmen to break their housing contracts mid-year simply because they desire a quieter environment. You only leave the residence halls in December if the disciplinary committee forces you to vacate. I recalled the 14 unexcused absences on her portal. I remembered the 0 grades. I thought about the social media footage of the fraternity parties and the ski trips. Khloe was not seeking a quiet academic sanctuary. She was being evicted for behavioral violations. Furthermore, Richard inadvertently revealed a fatal weakness in his own armor. His capital was not tied up in complex liquidity transitions. He was bleeding cash. He drained my $40,000 trust fund and funneled it into her tuition, her designer wardrobe, and her Aspen vacations. His credit was damaged because he was leveraging every available credit line to maintain the illusion of their wealth. I possessed the only pristine financial asset left in the bloodline. He wanted to exploit my immaculate credit score to catch his falling golden child. No, I stated. It was a single syllable. I delivered the word with a flat, even cadence. It was the first formal boundary I had ever drawn in my 20 years of existence. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. The line went dead silent. It was an acoustic void, the sound of a structural foundation cracking under pressure. For 19 years, I had functioned as the compliant workhorse. The workhorse was refusing the harness. "Excuse me," Richard said. His voice dropped an entire octave, replacing the salesman persona with the tyrant. "I will not co-sign a lease for Khloe," I articulated clearly into the receiver. "I am not assuming legal liability for her housing." The explosion followed exactly as predicted. Richard lost his temper. He shouted through the speaker, his words blurring together in a rapid torrent of character assassination. He called me a selfish, ungrateful child. He accused me of being deeply jealous of my sister and her prestigious, collegiate path. He told me I lacked the fundamental loyalty required to be part of the household. I did not defend myself. I did not point out the hypocrisy of a thief demanding loyalty. I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red icon to terminate the connection, and slid the device into my pocket. The retaliation was swift and calculated. By the time I boarded the city bus to return to my dorm, Richard had initiated a full communication blackout. He blocked my phone number. He restricted my access to the shared family data plan. But his true vengeance took place on the social battlefield. 2 days later, my cousin left a highly concerning voicemail on my machine. She spoke in hushed, pitying tones, asking if I needed the contact information for a psychiatric facility. Richard had systematically contacted the extended relatives and fed them a new, devastating narrative. He told them my withdrawal from university life had triggered a mental breakdown. He claimed I was acting paranoid, unstable, and deeply resentful of the family. It was a brilliant defensive strategy. By labeling me as mentally unwell, he effectively discredited any future truth I might expose. If I ever told Aunt Barbara about the forged bank signature or the stolen trust fund, she would simply view it as the delusion of a sick, jealous sibling. I chose to embrace the villain role. I did not return my cousin's phone call. I did not attempt to correct the rumors. I let them believe I was broken and isolated in the dark. Their smear campaign provided the exact cover I needed. While they spent their energy crafting lies, I spent my energy constructing my exit. 2 weeks passed in a grueling rotation of night audits and silent studying. The holiday season descended upon the city, bringing decorative lights to the hotel lobby and a sharp increase in demanding guests. On a Tuesday morning at 3 o'clock, the lobby was finally empty. I sat behind the mahogany reception desk, rubbing my tired eyes, and opened my personal email account on the hotel computer. A new message sat at the top of my inbox. The sender was the Graduate Management Admission Council. My pulse slowed. The ambient noise of the hotel ventilation system faded away. I clicked the link to access my official score report. The portal loaded, displaying a clean, clinical grid of percentiles and scaled metrics. My total score was a 760. I scanned the corresponding percentile column. I placed in the 99th percentile globally. I had outperformed nearly every other candidate who took the examination that year. I walked into the cramped back office. The cheap laser printer sat on a metal filing cabinet. I routed the document to the machine and pressed print. The printer hummed and clicked in the quiet room, sliding the warm sheet of paper onto the output tray. I picked up the document and traced the numbers with my index finger. This single sheet of paper was my golden ticket. It was the undeniable proof of my intellect, forged in the crucible of stolen sleep and discarded loyalties. Over the next 3 days, I utilized every spare minute of my shifts to finalize my application portfolios. I submitted my materials to 3 of the most elite, highly ranked business schools in the country. I paid the final application fees, bringing my bank balance dangerously close to zero once again. I did not care. The seeds were planted. I only needed to wait for the harvest. I assumed the family radio silence would persist through the winter. I was incorrect. The facade was crumbling faster than Richard could patch the holes. The very next morning, as I rode the bus back to my dormitory, my phone chimed. A text message bypassed the blockade. It was from Susan. The message lacked her usual pristine punctuation and formal tone. It read like a panicked transmission from a sinking vessel. "Please come to the house for Thanksgiving dinner. We need to talk about Khloe. It is an emergency." I stared at the screen. The golden child had finally hit a wall that Richard's checkbook could not break down. The escalating crisis was pulling them under, and they were desperate enough to summon the daughter they had just declared mentally unstable. I locked my phone, watched the gray city streets roll past the bus window, and began planning my reconnaissance strategy. I parked my beat-up sedan 2 blocks away from the property to avoid leaving any trace of my presence in their driveway. It was the 4th Thursday of November. The suburban streets were lined with dead leaves and inflated holiday lawn decorations swaying in the freezing wind. Walking up the concrete path to the front door, I felt zero nostalgia. I was entering a hostile environment. I approached the gathering not as a daughter returning home for the holidays, but as a forensic auditor stepping into a compromised corporate branch. The air inside the house smelled of roasted sage and cinnamon candles. It was a stark contrast to the industrial bleach and stale coffee of the hotel lobby I had inhabited for the past 3 months. Susan opened the door before I could even lift my hand to knock. She wore a pristine cashmere sweater and a tight, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She ushered me inside with frantic, hurried gestures. She did not offer a hug. She simply directed me toward the coat closet and told me to take a seat, quietly. The dining room was packed with extended relatives. Aunt Barbara was there, holding a crystal wine glass with a delicate grip. Uncle David sat by the brick fireplace, adjusting his tie. These were the same people Richard had systematically turned against me just weeks prior. They glanced at me with varying degrees of pity and hushed judgment. They fully believed the narrative Richard sold them. They thought I was a fragile, unstable college dropout working a dead-end retail job because I could not handle the pressure of higher education. I accepted their condescending nods without offering a single correction. I took my designated seat at the far end of the extended mahogany table. I blended into the background, folding my hands in my lap, ready to observe the dynamics of a failing institution. Richard stood at the head of the table, acting as the master of ceremonies. He was sweating slightly through his expensive dress shirt, dabbing his forehead with a cloth napkin. He poured imported red wine into everyone's glasses with a shaky hand. His voice was too loud for the intimate room, echoing off the plastered walls. He kept steering every conversation toward the concept of prestige, status, and legacy. He raised his glass to propose a formal toast to his youngest daughter. He called her the brightest mind of her generation, a trailblazer, destined to lead the family into a new echelon of wealth and success. The performance was rigid and overly rehearsed. A man secure in his investments does not need to shout about them over dry turkey. He was trying to convince himself just as much as he was trying to convince Aunt Barbara. The hollow ring of his voice betrayed a deep, underlying panic. Khloe sat to his right, absorbing the unearned praise. Her physical appearance was alarming and disjointed. She had lost weight, and her heavy foundation could not conceal the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She possessed a manic, ungrounded energy, tapping her fingernails against her water glass in a rapid rhythm. Whenever an aunt or uncle asked her a direct question about her seminar classes or her declared major, she executed a rapid, dizzying pivot. She deployed an endless array of corporate buzzwords she likely gleaned from short-form social media algorithms. She talked endlessly about the importance of networking within the startup culture. She claimed traditional grading rubrics were an archaic metric for measuring true innovation. She said she was currently prioritizing synergistic collaborations over textbook memorization. It was a fascinating psychological display. She was constructing an elaborate linguistic fortress of nonsense to hide the fact that she had stopped attending academic lectures in September. The relatives nodded along, confused but impressed by her confidence. The sensory overload of the dining room eventually prompted me to step away. I excused myself from the table to retrieve a glass of ice water from the kitchen. The kitchen was entirely empty. The marble counters were cluttered with dirty serving platters, discarded tinfoil, and abandoned serving spoons. The family tablet device sat unattended on the center island. The screen was unlocked and glowing bright white against the dim overhead lighting. Someone had forgotten to set the auto-sleep function. I walked over to the stainless steel sink, turned on the cold water faucet, and glanced down at the illuminated display. An email application was open and active on the screen. The account logged in belonged to Richard. The most recent message sat at the top of the inbox, sent directly from the university registrar office earlier that morning. The subject line was written in bold black text. Urgent. Academic probation and warning of dismissal. I reached out and tapped the screen to open the full message body. I did not feel any guilt invading his digital privacy. I was merely conducting a review of the funds he stole from my trust. The email detailed a catastrophic institutional failure. The university disciplinary committee was initiating formal separation protocols due to severe lack of attendance and failing marks. Attached below the text was a preliminary transcript for the fall semester. I read the numerical values lined up next to her registered courses. Introduction to Sociology, 0. Microeconomics, 0. Expository Writing, 0. Her cumulative grade point average sat boldly at the bottom of the column, 0.8. She failed every single credit hour. She was not just struggling to adjust to a new environment. She was officially facing expulsion. The $40,000 Richard extracted from my future had yielded a return on investment of less than a single grade point. It was a total, unmitigated, financial and academic disaster. I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the muffled sound of Richard boasting in the next room. He was currently regaling Uncle David with a fabricated story about Khloe receiving high praise from an esteemed economics professor. He was actively lying to a room full of blood relatives. He and Susan knew about the email. They knew the golden child was expelled. They knew the money was gone and the academic legacy was dead. Yet they chose to double down on the delusion. They were pouring expensive wine they could no longer afford to celebrate an academic career that no longer existed. The psychological fragility of their household was staggering to witness. They preferred to drown in a comfortable fiction rather than survive in a harsh reality. I locked the tablet screen, erasing the evidence of my discovery. I filled my glass with cold water and walked back into the dining room. I sat down in my designated chair and picked up my silver fork. I ate my dinner in complete silence, watching the tragic play unfold around me. I observed Khloe rambling about venture capital internships while carrying a 0.8 grade point average. I observed Richard sweating through his collar while his bank accounts ran dry. I chewed my food methodically. They were standing on a fragile trap door, and the hinges were already breaking under their weight. I possessed the only parachute. When Susan brought out the dessert plates, I stood up from my chair. I politely declined the pie. I announced to the table that my scheduled work shift was beginning soon, and I needed to catch the evening bus downtown. Aunt Barbara gave me a tight, sympathetic smile. She whispered that she hoped I found my footing and figured out my life path soon. I looked her directly in the eyes, thanked her for her concern, and assured her my path was perfectly clear. I grabbed my winter coat, walked out the front door, and stepped into the freezing November night. The contrast between the suffocating, desperate lies inside that house and the crisp winter air outside was exhilarating. The bomb they built was ticking down to zero, and I was safely outside the blast radius. But as I rode the city bus toward the downtown hotel, my mind shifted to the impending month of December. The university would formally process Khloe's dismissal during the winter recess. She would be sent home in permanent disgrace. I knew Richard would never accept a public defeat. He would attempt to rewrite the rules again to save face. He would try to find a loophole, a costly shortcut to salvage his failed investment. And I knew exactly whose ledger he would try to drain next to fund his desperate recovery plan. The real battle was just forming on the horizon. December brought a bitter, relentless chill to the city, turning the rain into sharp sheets of sleet that battered the glass doors of the hotel lobby. The final month of the year always felt like a pressurized chamber. Guests grew more demanding, the night audits grew more complex, and the physical toll of my dual life settled deep into my joints. I spent the quiet hours between 2 and 5 in the morning obsessively refreshing my email inbox. The early admission decisions for the top-tier business programs were scheduled for release. I had submitted my applications in total secrecy, sending my transcripts and test scores into the void, waiting to see if my grueling, solitary endurance would yield a tangible escape route. On a Tuesday morning, just as the sky outside the lobby windows began to turn a bruised shade of purple, my phone vibrated on the marble reception desk. A new message bypassed the spam filter. The sender identification displayed the admissions committee of a top 3 Ivy League institution. My breathing slowed. I did not open the message immediately. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my cheap polyester uniform blazer, and walked into the empty back office. I sat down in the squeaky swivel chair, placed the phone on the metal desk, and tapped the screen. The digital letter loaded. The first word printed at the top of the document was, "Congratulations." I read the opening paragraph 3 times to ensure my exhausted brain was not fabricating the text. I was officially accepted into their incoming Master of Business Administration cohort. But the second paragraph contained the true victory. The committee reviewed my pristine, standardized test scores and my unique undergraduate work history. They awarded me a merit fellowship. The grant covered 60% of the total tuition costs for the entire program. I scrolled down to the attached financial breakdown. I needed to calculate the exact remaining burden. The document listed the outstanding tuition balance, the mandatory university fees, and the projected living expenses for the first rigorous academic year. I added the figures together in my head. The required total was exactly $22,000. I minimized the email application and opened my personal banking portal. The screen authenticated my identity and displayed my current checking and savings summary. I had spent the last 2 years surviving on discounted instant noodles, working double catering shifts on weekends, and denying myself every basic comfort. The numeric value on the screen stared back at me. $22,014. The numbers aligned with a flawless, poetic precision. This was not luck. This was a mathematical triumph born from hundreds of hours of silent labor. I had built my own bridge out of the wreckage they left behind. When my shift ended at 7 in the morning, I did not take the bus back to campus. I walked 3 miles through the freezing city streets to a specialized craft and framing store, waiting on the snowy pavement until the owner unlocked the front doors at 9. I bypassed the cheap plastic borders and walked directly to the premium section. I selected a heavy, dark mahogany wood frame featuring a crisp, museum-quality white mat board. I paid for the item using physical cash, relishing the weight of the transaction. I returned to my dormitory room. I printed the official acceptance letter on thick, high-grade resume paper I had saved for this specific occasion. I unclasped the back of the mahogany frame, slid the pristine document behind the glass, and secured the metal tabs. The reflection of the dorm ceiling gleamed against the polished surface. I held my future in my hands. It was tangible, documented, and entirely mine. I did not hang the frame on the wall. I opened the bottom drawer of my metal study desk, placed the heavy wood face down against the bottom panel, and slid the drawer shut. I did not need to display it. I simply needed to know it was there. While I quietly secured my foundation in a cramped dorm room, the Orabel household structure formally collapsed. The fall academic semester concluded, and the university grading period closed. The final evaluations triggered an administrative guillotine. My cousin functioned as my unwitting intelligence operative. On a Thursday afternoon, my phone began vibrating with a rapid succession of frantic text messages. The dispatches painted a vivid picture of a family in free fall. Khloe was back in her childhood bedroom. She did not return for a standard winter holiday break. The university had executed their formal dismissal protocol. She was evicted from the campus residence halls. She arrived in a hired luxury sport utility vehicle surrounded by a mountain of expensive matching luggage. My cousin described the chaotic scene in the driveway. Khloe was sobbing, claiming the professors conspired against her innovative learning style. But the true scope of her failure extended far beyond the classroom. Along with her disastrous academic transcript, she carried a staggering amount of consumer debt. During her brief 4-month collegiate tenure, Khloe had acquired and maximized 2 high-limit credit cards. She utilized the plastic to fund designer winter clothing, extravagant dinners at downtown restaurants, and the infamous sorority ski trip to Aspen. The financial crater she excavated was far deeper than Richard or Susan had ever anticipated. The $40,000 stolen from my trust fund was entirely eradicated, and she had managed to generate thousands of dollars in new liabilities. The background of my father is crucial to understanding his reaction. Richard always viewed his children not as independent human beings, but as direct extensions of his own executive capabilities. A successful daughter was a trophy he could display to his peers to validate his parenting strategy. A failed daughter was a personal, humiliating reflection on his management skills. He could not process the concept of public defeat. My cousin detailed Richard's desperate, frantic behavior over the ensuing 48 hours. He paced the living room carpet, shouting into his cellular phone, treating the university administration like a vendor he could intimidate. He spent 2 full days attempting to negotiate with the dean of students. He offered to make a generous alumni donation to the campus library fund. He threatened to involve elite legal counsel to contest the grading rubrics. He demanded the institution grant a second chance for his allegedly brilliant progeny. The university declined every single proposal. A 0.8 grade point average leaves 0 room for administrative negotiation. You cannot bribe your way out of total truancy. The rejection was final. The designated family scholar was officially a collegiate dropout, returning home with nothing but a ruined transcript and maxed out credit lines. I read the text messages while sitting on my dorm bed. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow for Khloe, and I certainly felt no sympathy for the parents who engineered my financial ruin to fund her party schedule. The scales of consequence were finally balancing themselves. However, my forensic mindset immediately recognized the impending danger. Richard was a man whose entire identity relied on perceived superiority. He would never accept the shame of explaining his youngest daughter's expulsion to Aunt Barbara and the rest of the extended relatives. He would refuse to admit his investment strategy was a catastrophic error. He would need a new solution to hide the disgrace. He would need to invent a new narrative to explain why Khloe was suddenly living in her childhood bedroom. More importantly, he would need fresh capital to fund whatever desperate recovery plan he devised to clean her record. The stolen trust money was gone. His credit was overextended. The household liquidity was drying up. I looked toward the closed drawer of my metal desk. The quiet period was ending. The storm was gathering momentum, and I knew exactly whose ledger he would attempt to drain next. January brought a distinct, hollow quiet to the city. The holiday decorations in the hotel lobby were dismantled and packed into cardboard boxes, leaving the marble reception area feeling barren and exposed. I preferred the empty space. My bank account balance sat comfortably past the $22,000 mark required for my graduate tuition. I had secured my perimeter. I spent my night shifts reading advanced economic theory and drinking black tea, letting the rhythm of the new year settle into my bones. 10 miles away in the affluent suburbs, my family was drowning in the wreckage of their own design. The reality of Khloe being officially expelled had finally breached the walls of their home. A normal household might have utilized this crisis to teach accountability. A rational father might have required his daughter to secure employment and enroll in a local community college to rebuild her academic standing. Richard and Susan were incapable of rational parenting. Accountability requires acknowledging a mistake, and Richard viewed any admission of error as a fatal weakness. Instead of facing the facts, they executed a staggering psychological pivot. They constructed an alternative reality. Through the reliable channel of my cousin, I monitored the deployment of their new fiction. Richard began telling the extended relatives that Khloe did not fail out of the prestigious university. According to his revised script, she chose to leave because the institution was a toxic, archaic environment. He claimed the rigid professors stifled her inherent creativity and failed to nurture her innovative spirit. It was a breathtaking display of cognitive dissonance. They were reframing a 0.8 grade point average and a record of total truancy as a brave, artistic rebellion against a flawed educational system. To solidify this delusion, they needed a new destination for their golden child. Sending her to a state school would look like a demotion. They required a solution that projected exclusivity and wealth. They found their answer in a boutique, unaccredited, private rehabilitation initiative located in the Pacific Northwest. The brochure described it as a holistic academic realignment program. It was a predatory institution designed specifically to launder the failures of affluent youth. The organization promised to transfer her ruined credits, wipe her disciplinary record clean, and provide tailored life coaching to unlock her true potential. It was an expensive illusion. The admissions department required a non-refundable, upfront enrollment fee of $25,000. This numeric figure represented a lethal obstacle for Richard. His financial liquidity was entirely depleted. He had drained the $40,000 trust fund to pay for her disastrous fall semester. He had maxed out his available credit lines to cover the thousands of dollars in consumer debt she accumulated at the ski resorts and designer boutiques. The household cash flow was stagnant. The banks would not approve another unsecured personal loan. He was cornered by his own fiscal irresponsibility. He needed an influx of liquid capital, and he needed it immediately. He could not lower his pride to ask me directly, especially after spending the previous month telling everyone I was mentally unstable. He needed a proxy to soften the ground. He deployed Susan. On a Thursday afternoon, my cell phone vibrated on my dormitory desk. I let the incoming call route directly to the automated answering service. 3 minutes later, a notification icon appeared. I pressed play and listened to the recording. Susan sounded frantic, her breath hitching in a performed display of maternal distress. She spent the first 60 seconds detailing how exhausted she was, laying the foundation for a guilt trip. Then the tone shifted into targeted flattery. "Kaya, we really need you right now," her recorded voice echoed in my quiet room. "We are going through a very dark time with your sister. The world has been so unfair to her. We need our strong, capable Kaya to help us navigate this storm. We are a family, and families stick together when things get tough. Please come to the house tomorrow evening for an urgent family meeting. We need your level head." I let the audio file finish playing. I did not feel a single trace of empathy. I analyzed her vocabulary with clinical detachment. For months, I was the invisible dropout. When I refused to co-sign a luxury lease, I was the jealous, unstable villain. Now, when their bank accounts were empty and the enrollment deadline for the fake recovery program was looming, I was suddenly their strong, capable Kaya again. It was not an invitation to a family meeting. It was a calculated financial shakedown. They knew I had been working full-time on the night shift for months. They assumed I had stockpiled a modest savings account from my hotel wages. They intended to extract those wages to fund the next chapter of Khloe's curated deception. I deleted the voicemail. I did not text her back. I simply marked the requested meeting time on my calendar. I had been waiting for this exact convergence of events. They were inviting me into their home to execute a robbery, entirely unaware that I was arriving to detonate a forensic bomb. I spent Friday morning preparing my arsenal. I treated the impending confrontation like a hostile corporate takeover. I required undeniable documentation to dismantle every lie they planned to leverage. I booted up my laptop and opened my hidden encrypted folders. First, I printed a fresh copy of the itemized spreadsheet. The rows detailed every single dollar they had extracted from me, from the stolen teenage lifeguard savings to the secret termination of my health insurance premiums. The grand total sat bolded at the bottom of the page. Next, I printed the high-resolution scans of the bank closure form. I placed the image of Richard's forged rendering of my signature side by side with a verified copy of my actual legal signature. The visual discrepancy was stark, undeniable, and legally actionable. I slipped these documents into a thick manila folder. Finally, I opened the bottom drawer of my metal desk. I lifted the heavy, dark mahogany frame. The glass surface was perfectly clean, protecting the prestigious graduate school acceptance letter and the Merit Fellowship Award resting inside. I traced the edge of the wood with my fingertips. This was not just a piece of paper. It was the physical manifestation of my survival. I packed the manila folder and the mahogany frame into a sleek, structured leather tote bag I had purchased for my future business interviews. The bag felt heavy, weighted with the ultimate truth. I put on a tailored black coat, locked my dorm room door, and walked out to my car. The drive to the suburbs took 45 minutes. The winter sun was already setting, casting long, sharp shadows across the frost-covered lawns of my childhood neighborhood. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the ignition. The house looked warm and inviting from the outside, the windows glowing with soft yellow light. It was the perfect stage for a flawless illusion. I picked up my leather tote bag from the passenger seat. My heart rate was slow and steady. I felt no fear, only the icy anticipation of a long overdue reckoning. I walked up the concrete steps, reached out, and turned the brass handle of the front door. The final confrontation was about to begin. I stepped into the foyer of my childhood home. The house was stifling, the heating system cranked high to fend off the brutal January freeze. I slipped off my black wool winter coat and draped it over a wooden chair in the hall. I carried my structured leather tote bag into the formal dining room. They were already seated and waiting. The physical arrangement of the room was highly orchestrated. Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Susan and Khloe sat shoulder to shoulder on his right side. 3 chairs remained empty on the left. They left the single seat directly opposite Richard open for me. It was a classic interrogation formation designed to isolate the target. I placed my heavy tote bag on the floor next to my chair and sat down. Nobody offered me a glass of water. Nobody asked if my drive through the sleet was safe. The silence stretched for a full minute. I utilized the quiet time to observe the opposition. Khloe was staring down at her lap. She wore a cream-colored cable-knit sweater. I recognized the designer emblem embroidered near the hemline. The garment cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. She reached out with a perfectly manicured hand and began tracing the rim of her crystal water glass. She was executing the tragic victim routine with practiced precision. Susan looked exhausted, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously between Richard and me. Richard simply watched me. He steepled his fingers beneath his chin. He was attempting to project the calm authority of a chief executive officer managing a difficult subordinate. Susan initiated the conversation. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood. "Kaya, thank you for coming," she said. Her voice. They penalized her for thinking outside their rigid parameters. It broke her spirit. She needs a specialized environment to heal and reset her trajectory. I listened to the fiction without changing my facial expression. It was the exact same strategy they deployed when we were young children. If Khloe broke an expensive vase, the vase was placed too close to the edge of the table. If she failed a driving exam, the instructor harbored a personal bias. Accountability was a foreign concept in this household. Khloe sniffled on cue, wiping a dry eye with the sleeve of her luxury knitwear. "It has just been so overwhelming," Khloe whispered. "I tried so hard to conform to their expectations, but the pressure was unfair. I need a place that actually understands my potential." Richard cleared his throat. The sharp sound cut through Susan and Khloe and their emotional performance. He lowered his hands and placed them flat on the table. The time for soft sympathy was over. He was pivoting to the transactional phase of the meeting. "Let us look at the reality of the situation," Richard stated. She carried the heavy burden of representing the family academic standard on a national level. She took on the pressure that you walked away from. Now she requires our support to cross the finish line. I kept my hands resting lightly on my knees. He was seamlessly integrating his fabricated narrative into his pitch. He was actively using my alleged failure to leverage my financial compliance. "You chose a different path, Kaya," he continued. "You decided the rigorous collegiate track was not for you. You dropped out. I read the bold lettering printed on the cover. The Pacific Institute for Holistic Academic Realignment. We found the perfect recovery program for her," Richard declared. He was preparing to drop the numeric figure. "The cost of admission is significant," Richard said, his eyes locking onto mine. "The Institute requires an upfront enrollment fee to secure her placement for the spring term. Given I need you to transfer your personal savings, $22,000. We need the capital by tomorrow morning to wire the payment. I have a blank checkbook right here. You can write the check tonight." The air in the dining room turned stale. I looked at the 3 people sitting across from me. Khloe continued tracing the rim of her glass, feigning innocence while waiting for her payout. Susan held her breath, hoping the sheer force of Richard and his authority would override my autonomy. Richard stared at me with unwavering entitlement, expecting me to empty my bank account on his command. He did not ask for a loan. He did not offer a formal repayment plan. He framed the extraction of my life savings as my mandatory duty. He framed it as my penance for abandoning the academic standard he literally stole from me. He wanted me to hand over the $22,000 I bled for during graveyard shifts and double catering weekends. He wanted the money I suffered severe respiratory infections to save. He wanted it all to pay a predatory institution to launder the failure of the daughter who squandered my $40,000 trust fund on designer clothes and luxury ski trips. The audacity was so pure, so breathtakingly disconnected from reality, that it transcended normal human insult. A lesser betrayal might have provoked rage. A normal person might have yelled. I might have slammed my fists on the mahogany table and demanded an apology for the months of financial strangulation. I felt no anger. Anger implies a lingering hope that the opposing party can be reasoned with. Anger requires an emotional investment I no longer possessed. I only felt an icy, pristine clarity. The overlapping conflicts of my entire life had finally reached their ultimate peak. The invisible daughter, the stolen trust, the forged banking documents, the dropped medical insurance, the social smear campaign. It all converged on this single numeric demand. They believed I was a broken, uneducated hotel worker sitting on a pile of disposable cash. They believed they still controlled the narrative. I moved my hands from my lap. I reached down to the floor and grasped the thick leather handles of my structured tote bag. I lifted the bag and placed it squarely on the dining room table, next to the glossy recovery program brochure. The heavy thud of the leather against the wood echoed loudly in the quiet room. The time for observation was officially over. The trap was fully sprung, and they had locked themselves inside it. It was time to drop the guillotine. I kept my hands perfectly steady. The structured leather tote bag rested on the polished floorboards next to my chair. I unzipped the main compartment. The metallic rasp of the zipper sounded incredibly loud in the suffocating quiet of the dining room. Across the mahogany table, 3 expectant faces watched my movements. Richard sat back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He was waiting for me to pull out a checkbook. He expected total submission. For 19 years, compliance was my default setting. The invisible daughter always bent to the will of the patriarch. But the woman sitting in that chair was no longer his daughter. I was an auditor closing a bankrupt account. My fingers bypassed the thick manila folder holding the financial ledgers and the forged signature scans. I reached deeper into the bag and grasped the smooth, polished edges of the dark mahogany wood. The object possessed a satisfying physical density. It carried the weight of hundreds of sleepless nights and grueling shifts. I lifted the frame out of the leather tote. I did not slide it across the table like the cheap, glossy pamphlet Richard had just presented. I leaned forward and set it down directly in the center of the dining room table, placing it face up under the warm yellow glow of the overhead lighting. "I cannot give you that money," I stated. My voice was entirely flat. It carried the precise, modulated tone of a bank teller denying a fraudulent withdrawal. I utilized those funds for my graduate school enrollment. Richard frowned, his thick eyebrows pulled together, creating a deep crease in the center of his forehead. The statement did not align with the fiction he had spent months cultivating and selling to the extended relatives. To him, I was a fragile retail worker who could not handle the pressure of an introductory college syllabus. The phrase graduate school did not compute in his curated reality. "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded. His authoritative posture slipped, replaced by genuine confusion. "You do not have a degree. You are not enrolled in any academic program." I did not answer his question verbally. I simply nodded toward the framed object resting on the polished wood. Richard leaned forward. Susan shifted nervously in her seat, craning her neck to see over his broad shoulder. The dining room chandelier cast a targeted beam of light over the scene. The illumination caught the pristine glass surface of the frame, creating a sharp reflection that highlighted the emblem embossed at the top of the heavy resume paper. It was the official crest of a top 3 Ivy League institution. Richard narrowed his eyes. His gaze tracked the crisp black text printed on the document. I watched his pupils move across the sentences. I knew exactly what he was reading. He read the formal congratulations from the Dean of Admissions. He read the designation of the elite Master of Business Administration cohort. He read the explicit, detailed mention of the Merit Fellowship Award granted for exceptional standardized test performance. "This is a fabrication," Richard muttered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He knew a genuine institutional watermark when he saw one. He recognized the heavy, uncompromising reality of collegiate prestige. It was the exact prestige he tried to purchase for Khloe, only to watch her burn it down to ash in a single semester. Susan stared at the framed document, her mouth slightly open. The performed maternal concern she projected moments earlier evaporated, replaced by a stunned, hollow bewilderment. Her brain was struggling to reconcile the evidence on the table with the lies she had memorized. "You did not even finish your undergraduate studies," Susan stammered. Her voice trembled, betraying the fragile foundation of her deception. "Your father told Aunt Barbara you took a step back. You stopped attending your classes in October. You work at a hotel." I looked directly into my mother's eyes. I wanted her to feel the full, crushing weight of her ignorance. "I graduated last month," I replied. "I finished my degree requirements an entire semester early, magna cum laude." I let the academic distinction hang in the stifling air of the dining room. I wanted them to digest the magnitude of the achievement. I wanted them to understand the sheer volume of labor required to reach that threshold. I completed 18 advanced credit hours while working full-time on the night shift at a downtown hotel, I continued. My diction was crisp and lethal. I studied for my entrance exams behind a reception desk at 3 in the morning while recovering from a respiratory infection. I scored in the 99th percentile globally. The admissions committee reviewed my transcript and awarded me a fellowship covering 60% of my tuition. The remaining balance required exactly $22,000. I paid the non-refundable deposit yesterday. The realization hit the table like a physical shockwave. You could see the psychological architecture of the Orabel household collapsing in real time. For months, they operated under the assumption that they successfully hobbled me. They believed stealing my $40,000 trust fund and terminating my medical insurance had permanently grounded my trajectory. They thought they secured Khloe's status as the sole academic star of the bloodline by ensuring I could not compete. Instead, the invisible workhorse had vastly eclipsed the golden child in total, brilliant secrecy. I shifted my gaze to Khloe. She was no longer tracing the rim of her crystal water glass. Her hand rested limply on the table, her manicured fingers trembling. The performative, tragic victim routine crumbled instantly. Her expensive cream-colored sweater and her curated aesthetic offered zero protection against cold, hard, documented prestige. She sat frozen, staring at an Ivy League acceptance letter she could never earn, achieved by the sister whose future she actively tried to consume. Her lower lip quivered, but this time the tears welling in her eyes were born of genuine, humiliating defeat. The facade of the misunderstood genius was dead. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I had introduced an undeniable truth into a room sustained entirely by delusions. The cognitive dissonance was tearing their reality apart. Richard was a man who built his entire self-worth on being the smartest, most powerful entity in any room. Watching his discarded daughter produce a masterstroke of strategic survival short-circuited his ego. The initial shock rapidly curdled into desperate, thrashing anger. Confronted with undeniable success, his narcissistic instinct was to cannibalize it. He slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table. The crystal glasses rattled against the wood. "You will call the admissions office tomorrow morning," Richard barked. The volume of his voice spiked, a pathetic attempt to reestablish dominance through acoustic force. You will defer your enrollment for a calendar year. You will request a full refund of your deposit, and you will wire those funds into my checking account by noon. Your sister needs that recovery program now. You can wait. You owe this family. He was doubling down. He wanted me to dismantle my Ivy League future to finance a fraudulent recovery clinic for a daughter carrying a 0.8 grade point average. He believed his authority still held currency. I looked at his red, furious face. I did not blink. The time for the final autopsy had arrived. I reached back into my leather tote bag and wrapped my fingers around the thick manila folder. The mahogany frame sat untouched in the center of the dining table. The crest of the elite business school reflected the ambient yellow light from the chandelier overhead. For a fraction of a second, the room existed in a suspended state of disbelief. Then the cognitive dissonance shattered Richard and his fragile ego. Confronted with a documented reality that directly contradicted his fabricated narrative, he could no longer maintain his practiced corporate composure. His face flushed a dark shade of crimson. The shock rapidly curdled into desperate, frantic anger. He slapped his palm against the polished wood surface a second time, a crude attempt to reclaim authority through sheer acoustic force. "You will defer that admission immediately," Richard barked. The volume of his voice echoed off the plaster walls. "You will contact the university registrar tomorrow morning and demand a full refund of your deposit. You will transfer those funds into my primary checking account before the banks close at 5. Your sister requires that recovery program to salvage her academic future. You can wait another year. You owe us your loyalty. In this house, family comes first." He wielded that specific phrase like a blunt instrument. Family comes first. It was the historical motto of the Orabel household. I recognized the mechanism instantly. Growing up, that phrase was never deployed to foster mutual support or shared affection. It was a targeted linguistic weapon utilized exclusively to enforce my compliance. When Khloe wanted my bedroom because it possessed a larger closet, family came first. When Susan needed me to cancel my high school extracurricular activities to babysit so she could attend neighborhood social events, family came first. It was the universal justification for my sacrifice. I did not flinch at his elevated tone. I did not raise my own vocal register to match his fury. I reached into my structured leather tote bag for the final time. I bypassed the sleek electronics and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. "Let us discuss the concept of putting family first," I stated. My delivery was flat, measured, and entirely devoid of emotional inflection. I opened the manila cover. Inside rested a stack of printed spreadsheets. I had formatted the documents with the precise clinical structure of a forensic accounting report. I extracted 3 copies of the primary ledger. I slid one sheet toward Richard, one toward Susan, and kept the final copy resting directly in front of my own folded hands. "This is a comprehensive financial autopsy," I explained, looking directly into my father's furious eyes. "I recommend you review the itemized rows." Richard glared at the paper, his jaw clenched tight. Susan leaned forward, her eyes scanning the bold black ink printed across the crisp white columns. I did not wait for them to process the data independently. I served as their auditor, guiding them through the catastrophic bankruptcy of their own parenting strategy. I pointed my index finger at the top line of the spreadsheet. Here is the first expenditure, $40,000. This represents the educational trust fund established by my grandparents. You liquidated this specific asset and transferred the capital to Khloe last August. You claimed she was representing the academic future of our bloodline. I paused, letting the numeric value settle into the quiet room. Now let us examine the return on your investment. I acquired a copy of her official university transcript. During her 4-month collegiate tenure, your chosen scholar achieved a 0.8 grade point average. She accrued 14 unexcused absences in a single seminar. She submitted 0 passing assignments. She was not just struggling to adjust to a new environment. She was officially and permanently expelled for total academic failure. Susan gasped sharply. The sound was ragged and genuine. Her gaze snapped away from the spreadsheet and locked onto Khloe. The fracturing of the parental united front was immediate. Richard had clearly softened the truth when explaining the dismissal to his wife, likely claiming the university was simply not a good fit. Hearing the brutal, unvarnished statistics spoken aloud stripped away the protective padding. Khloe sank lower into her expensive cream sweater, her face turning pale. I moved my finger down to the second row. Here is the next liability, $1,200 in aggregate medical debt. In November, I contracted a severe respiratory infection due to physical exhaustion. When I attempted to purchase prescribed antibiotics at the pharmacy, I discovered you secretly terminated my health insurance coverage to save premium costs. You diverted those funds to subsidize sorority dues and luxury ski trips in Aspen for a student who was actively failing every registered course. I survived that illness while working minimum wage graveyard shifts because you prioritized her social networking over my basic physical survival. Richard opened his mouth to interrupt, but I did not afford him the oxygen. My voice sliced through his impending protest with lethal precision. I moved to the third and final itemized row. Here is the cost of a luxury 2-bedroom lease at the Vanguard apartment complex. 2 weeks ago, you telephoned me under the guise of paternal concern. You demanded I utilize my pristine credit score to act as a guarantor for Khloe. You fabricated a story about noisy dormitories. The reality was she was facing imminent eviction from campus housing due to disciplinary violations. You attempted to legally tether me to a massive rental contract, knowing your own liquidity was drained and your credit lines were maximized. You tried to trap me in a financial snare to catch your falling asset. The dining room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The ledger laid bare the systemic, parasitic nature of their demands. They could not argue with the printed dates, the verified amounts, or the documented timelines. You backed a bad investment, Richard, I stated, summarizing the report with the cold detachment of a corporate liquidator. You treated your daughters like commodities. Khloe spent $40,000 to fail out in a single semester. I spent my own blood, sweat, and physical health to secure a seat at an Ivy League institution. I generated prestige from nothing. She generated debt from everything. I am not liquidating my hard-earned future to bail out your failed asset. The brutal, unvarnished truth finally broke the remaining tension in the room. Khloe began to cry. It did not start as a quiet weep. It was the loud, performative sobbing she had utilized and perfected since childhood. Her shoulders heaved. She buried her face in her hands, emitting long, wavering wails designed to commandeer the emotional gravity of the room. It was a defensive mechanism. Whenever she was confronted with a consequence, she deployed her tears to transform herself into the victim, forcing everyone else to abandon the argument and soothe her distress. For 2 decades, that specific crying sound was my cue to yield. It was my cue to step backward, to offer my own possessions, to apologize for causing her discomfort. I sat in my chair and looked at her shaking shoulders. I did not lean forward. I did not offer a tissue. I did not speak a single word of comfort. For the first time in my existence, her manufactured sorrow elicited 0 response from my nervous system. I simply watched her perform, detached and unmoved. Susan fluttered her hands, caught between the damning evidence on the spreadsheet and the weeping child beside her. She reached out to rub Khloe on the back, murmuring soft, ineffective platitudes. Richard watched me ignore his favorite daughter. He witnessed the failure of his intimidation tactics and the collapse of Khloe's emotional manipulation. The realization that he no longer possessed any mechanism of control over me pushed him over the edge of reason. He pushed his heavy wooden chair backward. The legs scraped harshly against the floorboards. He stood up, towering over the mahogany table, his chest heaving with unrestrained fury. He was preparing to play his final, desperate card. He believed he still held the ultimate authority over the history of our household. He drew a deep breath, his eyes blazing with a tyrannical fire, ready to claim absolute ownership over every financial transaction that had ever occurred under his roof. He was about to demand my submission through sheer parental force, entirely unaware that I held one final, devastating piece of paper waiting in the manila envelope. Khloe wailed, a shrill and piercing sound that vibrated against the dining room windows. She buried her face in her arms on the polished mahogany, performing a theatrical breakdown designed to derail the confrontation. For her entire life, shedding tears was a guaranteed exit strategy from accountability. It was the same tactic she used in the 4th grade, when she broke a neighbor window and blamed the wind. Richard always stepped in to shield her from the consequences. Tonight was no different. He could not tolerate the visual of his favored child crumbling under the weight of empirical data. He pushed his chair back so hard, the wooden legs screeched against the hardwood floor. He stood tall, his chest heaving, attempting to utilize his physical size to dwarf me. He brought his open palm down against the table. The impact rattled the crystal water glasses and sent a shockwave through the room. "You ungrateful brat," Richard roared. The veins in his neck bulged, flushing a deep crimson. "I am your father, and I control the finances in this family. You do not get to sit in my house and audit my decisions. You owe everything you have to the roof I put over your head." The outburst was a classic display of an authoritarian losing his grip. He built his identity on the premise that his wealth and his word were the supreme laws of the household. By independently securing my own Ivy League funding, I had bypassed his jurisdiction. He was trying to reestablish his dictatorship using sheer volume. He wanted me to shrink. He wanted me to revert to the obedient teenager who handed over her paycheck without a second thought. I did not shrink. I maintained my posture, keeping my spine straight and my hands resting lightly on the manila folder. When an opponent relies on volume, you defeat them with silence. I waited for the echo of his shout to fade into the floral wallpaper. Then I opened the back flap of the envelope. I withdrew a single sheet of premium paper. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a high-resolution, full-color scan of a banking document. I placed it face up on the table and pushed it forward using just my index and middle fingers. The paper glided across the polished wood and stopped directly over his empty dinner plate. The top half of the page displayed the official closure mandate for the joint savings account I held as a teenager. The destination routing numbers were highlighted in yellow marker, showing the direct transfer of $2,140 into Khloe personal spending account. But the true lethal mechanism was printed on the bottom half of the page. I had utilized photo editing software to create a magnified, side-by-side comparison. On the left was my verified legal signature from a government identification card. On the right was the signature from the bank form. The flawed, lazy loop of the letter K sat magnified by 500%. The fraudulent tilt of the vowels was unmistakable. It was a visual confession, printed in stark black ink. Richard lowered his gaze to the paper. The transformation was instantaneous. The crimson flush drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His broad shoulders slumped forward. The physical intimidation tactics evaporated, replaced by the rigid, paralyzed posture of a prey animal caught in a snare. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He recognized his own clumsy attempt at forgery. The ambient noise in the dining room vanished. Khloe stopped wailing mid-breath, sensing the catastrophic shift in the atmospheric pressure. Susan sat perfectly still, her eyes darting between her husband and the document. The silence was so profound, so heavy, that the low mechanical hum of the kitchen refrigerator down the hall became the loudest sound in the house. The quiet stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. It was the sound of a patriarch realizing his empire was built on a crime. "You controlled the finances by committing felony fraud, Richard," I said. My voice was incredibly soft. I did not need to raise my tone. The truth carries its own acoustic weight. You forged my signature to drain my lifeguard wages. You stole from a minor to fund a luxury shopping habit for a daughter who was failing every single college course. That is not parental management. That is a criminal offense under federal banking regulations. Susan covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a stifled, suffocating gasp. She looked at Richard, waiting for him to deny the accusation. He did not say a word. He could not tear his eyes away from the magnified ink strokes on the paper. The realization that his own wife was watching his moral collapse seemed to hollow him out from the inside. I gave him a moment to process the gravity of his exposure. I wanted him to feel the cold, sharp edge of the blade resting against his neck. I have this original scanned file saved on 3 separate encrypted servers, I explained, keeping my cadence slow and deliberate. I have hard copies locked in a safety deposit box. I have also prepared a sworn affidavit detailing the theft, complete with the corresponding dates of the illegal transfer. The paperwork is currently sitting in a sealed envelope, ready to be handed directly to a fraud attorney. I watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. The authoritarian patriarch was gone. In his place sat a terrified, aging man staring down the barrel of a prison sentence and total social ruin. He knew a felony conviction would destroy his career. It would obliterate his credit score. It would shatter the pristine suburban reputation he had sacrificed me to build. He would become a pariah at his country club and a liability to his business partners. The leverage was entirely mine. I stood up from my chair. I did not pack the forged document back into my bag. I left it sitting on his dinner plate, a permanent reminder of his vulnerability. I looked at the 3 of them, memorizing the portrait of their defeat. They were a tableau of shattered illusions. Khloe looked small and terrified. Susan looked betrayed. Richard looked like a ghost. If you, Susan, or Khloe ever contact me again asking for a single dollar, I stated clearly, I will take this evidence directly to the police department, and after I file the formal charges, I will forward the entire police report to the admissions office of Khloe's new recovery program. I am sure an elite academic institution will be thrilled to learn their newest tuition check was funded by wire fraud. The threat hung in the air, binding them to a new, unbreakable contract. The dynamic of our bloodline was permanently inverted. I held the keys to his freedom, and the price of his liberty was my total, unbothered independence. He would never ask me to co-sign a lease again. He would never demand a check to fix a problem he created. The financial pipeline was permanently severed. I picked up my structured leather tote bag. It felt significantly lighter. The heavy mahogany frame containing my Ivy League acceptance letter remained sitting in the center of the table. I left it there as a monument to their miscalculation. Let them stare at the crest of the university every time they sat down to eat. Let it serve as a daily reminder of the scholar they threw away. I turned my back on the dining room and walked toward the front hallway. I did not rush. My footsteps were even and calm, echoing softly against the hardwood floor. I was leaving the patriarch trapped in his own quiet, devastating ruin. The battle was over, and the war was won. I stood at the head of the dining room table, my hand resting securely on the strap of my leather tote bag. The power dynamic in the room had permanently, violently inverted. The architecture of the Orabel family, built entirely on my subjugation and Khloe's fabricated brilliance, was now a pile of smoking debris. Richard did not move. His hands remained planted on the table, his knuckles white, but the fight had completely drained from his posture. The authoritarian bluster was replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a man comprehending the totality of his own ruin. He was a cornerstone that had just been removed, leaving the rest of the structure to collapse inward. Susan remained frozen, her gaze locked onto the magnified forgery I had left resting near Richard's empty dinner plate. You could practically see the gears grinding in her mind, frantically attempting to rewrite this new, devastating reality into something palatable. She was realizing her husband was a felon, and her favored child was a collegiate dropout carrying a mountain of consumer debt. The pristine suburban narrative she had dedicated her life to maintaining was dead. Khloe's theatrical sobbing had devolved into a series of jagged, wet hiccups. She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her expensive cream sweater, smearing her carefully applied makeup. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and panicked, waiting for the inevitable moment where I would soften, apologize for causing a scene, and offer to fix the situation. That was the script she had memorized. That was how every conflict in our household concluded. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I reached down and methodically gathered my documents. I collected the itemized financial spreadsheets detailing the $40,000 theft, the medical debt, and the attempted luxury lease coercion. I slid the papers back into the thick manila folder and placed it securely inside my bag. I retrieved the high-resolution scan of the forged banking form, slipping it behind a zippered compartment. However, I did not touch the heavy, dark mahogany frame resting in the center of the table. The glass surface gleamed under the chandelier, protecting the Ivy League acceptance letter and the Merit Fellowship Award. It sat there like a beacon of undeniable, documented prestige, completely inaccessible to the three people staring at it. I zipped my tote bag shut. The metallic sound echoed sharply in the quiet room. "You can keep that," I stated, gesturing toward the framed document. My voice was calm, projecting the serene detachment of someone walking away from a condemned property. I looked directly at Richard, who was still staring blankly at the polished wood. "Since you wanted a scholar in the house so badly," I added. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing left to negotiate, no apologies to extract, and no relationship to salvage. The conflict did not conclude with a heartwarming reconciliation or a dramatic screaming match. It concluded with a clean, surgical amputation. I turned my back on the dining room and walked down the hallway toward the front door. I retrieved my black wool winter coat from the wooden chair in the foyer. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and buttoned it up to my chin. The silence emanating from the dining room was absolute. They were paralyzed by the sudden, brutal implementation of consequence. They were waiting for a punchline that was never going to arrive. I reached out, turned the brass handle, and pulled the front door open. The freezing January air rushed into the stifling, overheated house. I stepped out onto the concrete porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The heavy latch clicked into place, severing the final physical tie to my childhood. The walk down the frost-covered driveway felt entirely different from my arrival. My footsteps crunched crisply against the ice. I did not feel the heavy, suffocating anxiety that usually accompanied any interaction with my parents. I felt an incredible, buoyant lightness. The gravity of their expectations had been permanently deactivated. As I reached the street and approached my parked sedan, my cell phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. I pulled the device out and looked at the illuminated screen. The notification center was overflowing with incoming data. Khloe was sending rapid-fire text messages, her typing frantic and misspelled. "Kaya, please wait," the first text read. "I am so sorry. I didn't know Dad took your money. Please don't go to the police. I will pay you back, I promise." The second message arrived a fraction of a second later. "We can figure this out. Just come back inside. Please, Kaya." I am terrified. I read her frantic apologies with clinical interest. She was not sorry for consuming my college fund or enjoying luxury ski trips while I worked graveyard shifts. She was terrified of the impending criminal investigation and the loss of her pristine reputation. Her apologies were transactional, designed to purchase my silence. Before I could swipe away her texts, an incoming call overrode the display. The caller identification indicated it was Susan. She was likely calling to beg for a compromise, to plead for family unity, to construct a new fiction where we could all pretend the financial autopsy never occurred. She wanted to lure me back into the house to resume my role as the shock absorber for their dysfunction. I did not answer the call. I tapped the red icon to decline the connection. I navigated to the settings menu on my phone. I selected Khloe's contact profile and activated the block feature. I repeated the process for Susan. Finally, I located Richard's number in the directory and blocked his access as well. The digital blockade was instantaneous and absolute. The vibrations ceased. The screen went dark. The silence of the winter night rushed back in, undisturbed by their panic. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The heater roared to life, blowing warm air against my frozen hands. I put the transmission into drive, pulled away from the curb, and navigated out of the suburban neighborhood. I did not look back at the house in the rearview mirror. The drive back to my campus dormitory was a journey of total reclamation. I had successfully executed the extraction. I reclaimed my narrative from Richard's smear campaign. I protected my assets by refusing the luxury lease and exposing the forgery. Most importantly, I built an impenetrable, documented wall between my Ivy League future and their toxic, parasitic decay. They were now entirely responsible for their own survival. Richard would have to face the financial crater he excavated. Susan would have to live with the knowledge of her husband's criminality. Khloe would have to confront the reality of her expulsion without a scapegoat to absorb the blame. The insulated bubble of the Orabel household had finally ruptured, and I was miles away when the oxygen ran out. I parked my car in the student lot and walked up the stairs to my room. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and tossed my keys onto the desk. The space was small, sparsely furnished, and smelled faintly of institutional cleaning supplies. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. I unzipped my leather tote bag and removed the thick manila folder containing the forensic evidence. I placed it carefully in the bottom drawer of my metal desk, right where the mahogany frame used to rest. The evidence was secured, ready to be deployed if they ever attempted to breach the perimeter. I sat down on the edge of my twin bed and unlaced my shoes. My shift at the hotel began in 3 hours. I still had ledgers to reconcile, coffee to brew, and textbooks to read. The physical labor of my dual life was not over, but the psychological burden was permanently lifted. The invisible workhorse had broken the harness. The golden child was buried under her own gilded failures. The patriarch was terrified of his own shadow. The systemic conflict that defined my existence was surgically resolved, leaving behind a clean, empty space. I set my alarm clock, lay back against the pillows, and closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep without calculating the cost of my own survival. I was entirely free. However, the architecture of American society dictates that financial ruins rarely remain silent forever. Debt has a gravitational pull, and desperate people will inevitably seek out the nearest source of capital, regardless of the boundaries established. I knew the Orabel family would eventually reach a breaking point, where pride was secondary to survival. I simply needed to prepare for the moment they realized the safety net they shredded was the only thing preventing their absolute destruction. The story jumps forward exactly 24 months. The automatic glass doors of a sleek, steel-framed skyscraper slide open, releasing me onto the concrete pavement of downtown Chicago. The wind coming off Lake Michigan is biting, carrying the residual chill of late winter, but the temperature does not bother me. I adjust the collar of my tailored wool trench coat. Tucked securely inside my leather briefcase is my new corporate identification badge. The plastic card bears my photograph and my professional designation, Senior Financial Analyst. It is a Friday afternoon. I have just concluded my first official week at a premier wealth management firm. My designated office overlooks the river, a far cry from the subterranean hotel break room, smelling of industrial bleach and burnt popcorn. The intervening 2 years unfolded exactly according to my blueprint. The Ivy League Master of Business Administration program was a grueling crucible of intellectual endurance. However, compared to the reality of balancing 18 undergraduate credits while working nocturnal hotel audits and battling respiratory infections, the graduate curriculum felt like an extended vacation. I dedicated my entire focus to the coursework. I lived in a sparse, affordable studio apartment on the edge of the campus. I consumed simple meals and spent my weekends in the university library. I did not accrue a single cent of interest. The Merit Fellowship covered the bulk of the tuition. I utilized the $22,000 I saved from my hotel wages to fund my remaining living expenses. I graduated at the very top of my cohort. I hold an elite degree, a lucrative career, and zero financial liabilities. My net worth is entirely positive. My trajectory is a straight, unencumbered line. The structure I left behind in the suburbs followed the exact trajectory of a compromised asset. I received the final diagnostic report 3 days ago. My cousin telephoned me during my lunch break. She functions as the unofficial historian of the extended relatives, and I treat her dispatches like raw data updates. Following my surgical extraction from the dining room that January evening, Richard refused to accept defeat. His ego required a successful offspring to validate his parenting strategy. He proceeded with his desperate plan to enroll his youngest daughter in the unaccredited Pacific Northwest Holistic Recovery Initiative. To afford the exorbitant upfront enrollment fees, Richard and Susan engaged in catastrophic fiscal irresponsibility. They took out a staggering second mortgage on their primary residence. They leveraged the remaining equity of their home to purchase a fabricated second chance for a student with a 0.8 grade point average. The investment yielded the exact same return as the first. The boutique program required basic daily attendance and minimal effort. Khloe provided neither. She dropped out of the recovery clinic within 6 months, citing unresolvable creative differences with the coaching staff. The institution retained the non-refundable tuition. She returned to her childhood bedroom for the second time. According to the data provided by my cousin, Khloe currently resides in their basement. She works 15 hours a week, folding denim at a retail clothing store in the local shopping mall. The designated scholar of the Orabel bloodline is a minimum wage employee living under a roof her parents can no longer afford to maintain. Richard ruined his pristine credit score. The combined monthly payments on the primary and secondary mortgages vastly exceed his stagnant income. Susan was forced to re-enter the workforce. She secured employment as a receptionist at a suburban dental clinic to offset the household deficit. The curated facade of their wealth is a smoldering ruin. They traded their financial security to protect a comfortable lie, and the lie bankrupted them. I walk 2 blocks down the busy avenue and enter an independent coffee roaster. The shop smells of roasted espresso beans and warm pastries. The barista greets me with a brief nod. I order a black coffee, pay using a premium travel rewards card, and step aside to wait near the pickup counter. The ambient noise of the cafe is soothing. I pull my cell phone from my pocket to review my professional calendar for Monday morning. Out of sheer habit, I open my personal email application. My digital inbox is highly organized. I established rigorous filters to segregate important correspondence from promotional material. My security settings automatically route blocked contacts directly to a hidden folder. But technology occasionally experiences a minor glitch. A single message managed to bypass the primary quarantine filter and land in my general inbox. I look at the sender identification. It is Richard. The timestamp indicates he sent the transmission at 2 a.m. The subject line reads, "Kaya, please, we are losing the house." I tap the screen to open the message body. I read the text with the detached curiosity of an archivist reviewing an ancient artifact. The paragraphs are a frantic, disjointed blend of desperation and lingering entitlement. He begins by offering a vague, formless apology for the past. He utilizes passive language to avoid any direct admission of the felony forgery or the stolen trust fund. He states that mistakes were made on all sides and that holding grudges is detrimental to family unity. He then pivots swiftly to his core objective. He details the impending foreclosure of their suburban property. He claims the bank is threatening to seize the house within 30 days. He knows I graduated from the business program. My cousin likely informed him of my new corporate position and my starting salary. He demands I secure a personal loan to cover their mortgage arrears. He frames the request as a temporary bridge, promising to repay the funds once he liquidates some unspecified asset. It is an apology wrapped inside a financial shakedown. He is asking the invisible daughter he discarded to purchase the roof over the head of the golden child who ruined him. I stare at the glowing screen. 2 years ago, reading these words might have triggered a spike of adrenaline. It might have elicited a profound sense of vindication or a residual wave of sorrow. Standing in the warm coffee shop today, I conduct a brief internal inventory of my nervous system. I search for a reaction. I feel no anger. I feel no triumph. I feel no guilt. The emotional real estate they once occupied inside my mind is vacant. They are strangers dealing with the mathematics of their own poor decisions. I am an observer, watching a distant storm dissipate over the horizon. I tap the reply icon. A blank digital canvas appears on my screen. I do not type a paragraph explaining my refusal. I do not remind him of the hotel night shifts, the stolen $40,000, or the Ivy League acceptance letter he tried to force me to defer. Explanations are reserved for people who seek to be understood. I only seek to be left alone. I type 3 distinct words onto the screen. Return to sender. I look at the phrase for a fraction of a second. Then I press the delete icon, erasing the draft and the original message in one fluid motion. The message vanishes into the digital trash bin. I update my security settings to permanently block the new routing address he utilized. The threat is neutralized. The barista calls my name from the counter. I slide my phone back into my pocket, pick up the warm paper cup, and push open the heavy glass door. I step back out onto the Chicago pavement. The morning sun cuts through the tall buildings, casting bright geometric shapes across the concrete. The city is loud, busy, and indifferent to the history of the Orabel family. That indifference is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced. I take a sip of the hot coffee. The future, stretching out in front of me, is a blank ledger, waiting for my own entries. I walk down the avenue toward the train station, secure in the knowledge that every step I take belongs to me. The heavy chains of obligation are broken. I am breathing clean air. It is a quiet, unremarkable freedom, and it is perfect.
The collapse of the Orabel household is not merely a narrative about a stolen college trust fund, a forged bank document, or an Ivy League acceptance letter kept hidden in the shadows. It is a profound, clinical cautionary tale exposing the destructive architecture of toxic parenting. When we analyze the wreckage of Richard and Susan's decisions, a clear pattern of deeply flawed behavior emerges, serving as a stark warning to anyone navigating the complexities of raising a family. The most glaring fracture in their foundation was the weaponization of favoritism. Choosing one child to carry the mantle of the family's only hope does not secure a lasting legacy. It guarantees long-term psychological damage. In a culture that values individual autonomy, every child deserves equal opportunities to develop their own unique potential. Parents must never impose rigid roles or arbitrarily dictate who inherently deserves success. By crowning Khloe as the designated scholar while casting Kaya as the invisible workhorse, the parents tragically misjudged true capability. This dynamic demotivates the neglected child, while crippling the favored one with an unearned, fragile sense of superiority. Furthermore, the story highlights the lethal error of treating education like a financial gamble. Resources should never be placed like casino chips on a single individual at the expense of another's survival. Investing fairly and distributing support equitably reduces collective risk and builds a sustainable, stable foundation. The parents failed to understand that genuine success requires rigorous discipline, not just blind expectations. By spoiling their youngest daughter and shielding her from the natural consequences of her truancy, They practically guaranteed her failure. A prestigious university decal on a rear windshield means nothing if the student lacks the fundamental work ethic to read the syllabus. Equally critical is the undeniable necessity of respecting a child's financial independence. Demanding that an adult daughter sacrifice her hard-earned savings, abandon her goals, and bankrupt herself to rescue a sibling violates the core principles of individuality and self-reliance. Family support should be a reciprocal safety net, not a mechanism for parasitic extraction. When a parent views a child's income as a communal emergency fund, they cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. Financial boundaries are the ultimate defense mechanism against those who refuse to respect your autonomy. If you have ever found yourself trapped in a system where your sacrifices were demanded but your achievements were erased, you are not alone. Thank you for spending your time here with Sophia Told Stories. Please subscribe to the channel if this journey resonated with your own lived experiences, and leave a comment below sharing how you managed to establish your own unshakable boundaries. Walking away from the people who were supposed to protect you is rarely a loud, victorious triumph. It is a quiet, solitary marathon toward peace. You build your perimeter, you secure your assets, and you finally breathe the clean, uncomplicated air of your own independence. Yet even in that pristine freedom, as you navigate a life you built entirely with your own two hands, you might catch a fleeting reflection in a downtown window and wonder if the quiet spaces left behind by the people we had to walk away from will ever truly feel resolved, or if we just learn to live comfortably beside the ghost.